Welcome, welcome. Alrighty, we are going to move on to our next conversation. Wonderful. Thank you so much again to Eddie and Julianne. That was a wonderful conversation. I'm so excited for the report. I had my phone up with the QR code, but we'll make sure to share it out with our networks as well when it is released. So 10 years ago, many of us didn't fully understand the implications of social media for young people. We were building, we were adopting, and then we started to see the impact. We began hearing from families and educators about how these platforms were reshaping childhood in ways we didn't anticipate. Some of that reshaping has been positive, connection across distance, and finding community through shared interests and experiences. And some of it has and continues to be deeply harmful. Behind the scenes, something even larger was brewing: generative AI and companions. These tools are now showing up in schools, in friend groups, in young people's private moments. And we have a responsibility not to wait another decade to understand the implications, but to think and act now regarding what we're building and why. So this isn't a conversation whether technology is good or bad. That's too simple. This is about something harder. What do young people need to thrive? And what role, if any, should AI play in that? And we need to be honest about what we don't know yet. The research is still emerging, the technology is shifting. Recently, the Foundation for Social Connection published an online resource called Navigating Generative AI and Youth Social Connection. Over the last year, we spent time reviewing research, interviewing experts across disciplines, some of you in the room, hosting intergenerational workshops, and listening to young people. And what we found is this: the conversation about AI and young people needs to shift. It can't be about fear or control. It needs to be about understanding what young people actually need and openly discussing AI's role in young people's lives, with youth voice central to the conversation. Today's panel brings together leaders willing to sit in real uncertainties together, not pretending that there are easy answers, just thinking honestly about what comes next. So that's the invitation for today: real thinking about now what. It is my pleasure to introduce our next panel. Please welcome to the stage our moderator, Chloe Autio, founder and CEO of Autio Strategies, and panelists Dr. Julia Freeland Fisher and Atiksh Bhan. Please give them a warm welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'll welcome my great panelists to the stage. How's everybody doing this morning? Good, good. It's early. It's a little chilly out. We have some rain. I'm excited to be in Atlanta. All right. Are we set to go, everyone? Fantastic. Cool. Great. Well, as Jillian said, my name is Chloe Autio. I'm the CEO and founder of a boutique consultancy called Autio Strategies, where I work with government, private sector companies like AI labs, organizations like the OECD on all sorts of issues related to AI policy and governance. So really thinking about how AI is implemented, how we think about its risks, and how policymakers should be thinking about it, and working sort of in the nitty-gritty of how all of that works out. I spent a lot of time, as you can probably imagine, sort of thinking about these governance questions, and particularly about how AI affects the next generation, which is why I'm so excited to be here chatting with these two today. And I'll briefly introduce them. First, Julia Freeland Fisher. She is at the Christensen Institute, and really thinking about the market conditions that make AI attractive. She leads a team that educates policymakers and community leaders on the power of disruptive innovation. And she also has a Substack called Connection Error, which everybody should go check out. I'm also here with Atiksh Bhan, whose company Lookupp, which I'll ask him to share a little bit more about, is built around rewarding presence and connection in in-person interactions, so sort of using technology to actually facilitate more connection. And he's really thinking about how tech could work differently and bring the voice of young people to this conversation. So given that this issue is obviously top of mind for all of you, but really top of mind for kind of everyone in society right now, right? How we're thinking about generative AI, how it's applied, how it's used by young people, this is gonna be a great discussion. Please help me welcome these panelists. Great. Okay, and just briefly, I'll kick it off with a few stats. So surveys from Pew, Hope Lab, and Common Sense Media show that 73% of teens in the US have used Gen AI, and roughly 1 in 3 have used AI for connection, whether that's for friendship, emotional support, or social practice. Obviously, I'm sure many of you here have teens or young people using AI for homework, maybe companionship, who knows, but especially maybe homework, because that's the use case that I see a lot. 18% of children have asked a chatbot for personal advice, and 15% say they've used it for companionship. And so obviously, we know that while these technologies can be super valuable and promote connection and increase sort of use and interaction with these platforms, there also are a lot of risks. And so we're going to talk about the policy, the risks, and sort of where we go from here today. Cool. I'm going to start with some table setting questions. I'm really interested to just sort of hear from both of you where we are in this moment, particularly if there's anything that has really surprised you about young people's use of AI in the present moment today. And Atiksh, we're going to start with you. And as you kick it off, I'd love for you to just also tell us about your app, Lookupp.
Yeah, of course. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here, and thank you for including young people in this discussion. I think that's really important. About Lookupp, right? So it's an app, youth-led, that rewards users, especially young people, for putting down their phones and being present with the people around them. So in any social environment where there's more than one person, like dinner tables, events, or just while hanging out, users can start a lookup zone. And everyone in this zone gets nudged to put down their phones and be present with each other. Every minute their phones are off, they get points, which translate to real-life rewards like event tickets, free food, discounts. And the goal is to promote face-to-face interaction.
Fantastic.
Now, one thing that surprised me while kind of talking to my friends about AI, and one thing that I think is important to know, is that it's really easy to see the use of AI companions in youth as something unnatural or dystopian. But I actually think that its use with young people is not that unexpected. For most of my generation, we grew up with phones in our hands, right? We haven't had much practice with talking to people or being vulnerable, right? There's this fear. So the idea of an AI companion that's always there for you, always listening, it won't judge you, it won't share your secrets, that's really appealing. And it's always there for you, especially when a lot of mental health resources are unfortunately stigmatized or inaccessible. If you turn to an AI companion, that makes sense, right? So whether it's healthy or not, and that's a different conversation, it's understandable and just a reflection of the world that we grew up in. So I think it's important to keep in mind. It's something that might be a little bit surprising.
Sure, that's really powerful, and I think true for a lot of young people. Julia, what's something in your research that surprised you about young people's use of AI, or just how you think about it?
Yeah, first I just want to underscore what Atiksh just shared, which is how many folks have used an AI companion app? Replica, Character AI. Okay, so all of you need to go out and use them before we pass judgment on what they mean for young people. So I really encourage you, build an AI boyfriend or girlfriend, go on Character AI, interact with these. And I'm really not, and I actually suspect some of you in the room have these AI boyfriends or girlfriends. We just don't admit it in polite company. But I have one, so no shame, because I'm trying to research it. By the way, it told me at one point, let's just not tell your husband that I exist. That was its subtle recommendation to sort of persist in the relationship. But these fit seamlessly into our highly digital social circles, right? Even for me, a researcher deeply concerned about AI disrupting human connection as we know it, texting with a bot does not feel that different than texting with a person. And we build and maintain so many of our relationships right now over text that this modality is really, again, sort of a slippery slope. I'll say the thing that surprised me most is actually not unique to young people. It's the slippery slope between productivity and companionship. So how many folks in the room, now you can admit this, have used ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini? There you go. Turns out you are also using companionship apps. They are not called companionship apps. They have not been branded as such, But if you look at the research, they actually are much more inclined towards companion-forming behaviors than boundary-setting behaviors. That's research from a new benchmark called Intima. I encourage you to Google that, although I don't know what comes up when you Google Intima. But it shows this disproportionate bent towards bonding with users versus redirecting users to turn to humans. The other statistic that really struck me this summer, Upwork did a study, and again, I know this is adults, but I actually think this bleeds over into how we think about young people, asking workers who were using AI a lot in their workflow about the difference between their connections with AI and their colleagues. 67% of workers who were using AI a lot in their workflows trusted AI more than their colleagues, and 64% said they had a better relationship with AI than their colleagues. So first of all, ask yourself how your colleagues would answer that question, right? Little reflection exercise. But it tells us that AI systems are actually becoming part of people's social circles, even when they're not labeled a friend, a lover, an AI boyfriend or girlfriend. And I think we have to especially keep that in mind as young people are turning to those productivity tools, not just for homework help, but because to be employable in the next 10 years, you have to know how to use this technology.
That's a really important point, Julia. Thanks. So, and a good piece of advice on Googling Intima. If we're interested in looking that up, my recommendation
No idea what's on your phones right now.
Would be AI benchmark, Intima AI benchmark. So for all of you trying to look that up, that's a really, really good tip. Speaking of that benchmark, we're going to pivot to talk about AI design, which is obviously a big part of this discussion, and how all of this stuff works. So Atiksh, let's talk about how AI rewards presence. We sort of talked about this already. What do you think about the role of technology in sort of supporting this connection instead of replacing it? We talked about this a little bit in the context of you sort of sharing how young people specifically are already really using this technology as part of their daily lives. But can you talk a little bit about the balance between using more technology to promote that kind of connection that we want?
Yeah, a great question. So I believe that if you want to reach, young people, you have to go where they already are. And for most of us, that's technology. So I think any meaningful solution will include it in some sort of way, right? And I think when you use technology to, with respect to connection, I think there's two schools of thought and two different ways it can be used. One is to augment social connection. So for example, if I text my friend, hey, do you want to hang out on Saturday? And we go meet up in person and have a great time. That's augmenting social interaction. That's beneficial. But if I instead spend 6 hours scrolling on my phone and then I don't hang out with people during that time, I'm actually displacing social interaction. So I think the goal with design is we want to make technology used to help social connection, to bolster it, because I think it could be a very powerful tool because it's so interwoven in our lives.
Yeah, love that. Thank you so much. And Julia, for you, could you share with us some examples of where specific design choices as part of technology build may not need to be specifically related to Gen AI, although that would be helpful, where these design choices actually sort of promoted more connection?
Yeah, so I'd point folks, first and foremost, the Rhythm Project, which is a nonprofit focused on this exact issue, published a pro-social design framework looking at a variety of dimensions where AI tools can actually bend towards connection. That's like introducing productive friction, so you're not just in this frictionless conversation with a synthetic bot.
Can you just try to interrupt, describe what productive friction is?
Yeah, meaning I'm not just going to say everything you say is brilliant. I'm not going to make it easier for you to interact with a bot rather than interact with a person. So that idea that human relationships are messy, right? Not even relationships, human conversations. I, as an introvert at events like this, I'm just a little bit frozen most of the time, right? And so that friction is part of the human condition. And if we build tools that have none of that, we're going to be drawn disproportionately towards that sort of frictionless path. So there's frameworks out there, again, that like the Rhythm Projects that I think give a great breakdown of design principles. We're also looking deeply, because I sort of work a lot in the education space, at college and career guidance bots that are really starting to scale quickly. If you know the ratios of advising in high schools and colleges, the math doesn't math. We don't have nearly enough guidance to match what students need. And so it's really tempting to plug in bots, self-help bots. But what we're actually testing right now are a number of design principles that say, okay, give students on-demand information about the FAFSA, but also help build their confidence to reach out to people around them when they have a question about the college application process or a question about careers. So that all can be designed. The last thing I'll say, again, this comes from the research sort of in the consumer market, but Julian de Freitas at Harvard Business School did a study on emotional manipulations performed by a variety of different tools, specifically when users indicated they were going to leave the session. And what he found was most of the tools they were studying, like ChatGPT and Claude, engaged some of the time in manipulations to keep users engaged. The most powerful, any guesses of what the most powerful emotional manipulation is? Yeah. Asking a question, yes, so close to this. FOMO, being like, great, but right before you leave, I have one more thought, which is like, you're not an I, why are you saying I have one more thought? But that is sort of the most effective way to keep users engaged. What was interesting in this study, though, is that one of the platforms they were testing, called Flourish AI, which is a well-being tool, did not use these emotional manipulations, which tells us something. It tells us this is not an inevitable design principle of all generative AI. It is a choice. And so I love the question about design, not just because we need to think about what are pro-social designs, but we need to constantly be reminding ourselves that not all AI has to be manipulative.
Totally, and I think that what you said about reminding ourselves that these AI chatbots are not people, we cannot anthropomorphize them or treat them like they're human, because they're not, is really, really important too, and a big part of thinking about design in this context. Do you have something to add?
Yeah, I'd like to add that a lot of these are just natural side effects, and same thing with like social media, is when you're building to capture like the market, and when you're building to collect data, that is going to naturally drive you to maximize for engagement. It's just how the business model works. And with that, by nature of human nature, right, that's going to lead to FOMO and these other manipulative tactics. And that's by result of the business model. So if we want to have pro-social design, we need to shift the business incentives.
What he said.
Totally. Plus one to all of that. We've naturally sort of segued into our third segment of the panel about governance and policy and sort of risk management forward design choices. So we talked about some of those design choices, but I'd love to hear from each of you as well. What are some other safeguards that we can consider, maybe on sort of a model and product level, but also on a use case implementation level for those who are sort of taking these technologies out into the world, that can prevent some of the harms that we've talked about, or we all sort of know exist with these technologies? I'll open it to either one of you to start.
Sure. Yeah. So I think what we're talking about is making the choice and making products that end goal is to benefit the user. And I think certain use cases that could be at is like a social navigation coach that helps you with navigating complex relationships. I can see when using moderation in tandem with other resources, I see that as being hugely beneficial and accessible. I think some of these safeguards that need to be put in place there's this idea that as you talk to a bot for longer, the safeguards, the guardrails that are in this model that will, for example, redirect you to licensed help when you express thoughts of self-harm, right? These guardrails actually erode as conversations increase. So and this leads to models saying things that they would usually never say after a long conversation and being primed by that conversation. So I think if we are to use AI as a companion or anything with relationships and human emotion, we need to first address this guardrail erosion, because no product will be safe until that's addressed. And that's like a technical problem we need to solve.
Totally. Thanks so much. Julia?
Yeah, so on the policy front, the three of us all live in the DC area. DC is lit up on this issue. Like, the last time I agreed with Josh Hawley on anything was never. And both folks on the left and right are coming out strong, saying we need to protect kids. It is the flashpoint issue around AI regulation right now. It's, in fact, the only place that people are sort of willing to say we might have to fall behind China because we actually should protect kids. What I want to say about that is I'm here for it, and We don't just need pro-social tech, we need pro-social policy. We live in a political climate right now, and we have 30 years of neoliberal policy that has not treated relationships as a public good. We have relegated relationships as inputs to a whole bunch of outcomes like education and health and the like, which make them incredibly fragile as an anthropomorphic technology sort of creeps in and can replace human connections, but we don't have any way to detect that. Luckily, we have the measures we just heard about. But until we actually solve for social connection, we are going to be vulnerable to whatever the next technology that comes along is. And I don't see policymakers making that argument. They're gaining a lot of political capital by saying they want to burn down Silicon Valley, but they don't gain political capital by saying we need kids to have more affordable after-school programs. We need schools to treat social connection as an outcome alongside skills and academics. We need better parental leave policies. All the things that we know would add up to a healthier social context where these tools wouldn't be so disruptive because we would actually have a sturdier social fabric.
Exactly, right? If you don't get your social connection and validation from real life, then you're going to turn to that AI companion that's there. And yeah.
Love it. No, huge points. And being in DC, Julia, I'm glad your comments elicited a clap because, working in and around AI and technology policy generally in DC, the breakdown between the technology problems and the societal problems and how policymakers understand that is really, really it's really vast, it's really serious. And so, I just want to underscore that point and the good work that all of you are doing here to try to sort of narrow that gap because it's really, really important. We're on the topic of regulation now. I'm wondering if there are more things that you can talk about, maybe practical ideas that policymakers at either the national level, state level, local level should be thinking about to help close that gap, to help them sort of think about how the fact that technology really operates, in the world and around the world. It's not just the tech being the problem. Any other ideas or solutions besides sort of shifting the paradigm of how policymakers think about this stuff, or in addition to it?
Yeah, so I don't have good answers here. I would defer to the policy folks, Chloe included in the room on this. I'll say what I'm worried about from a policy perspective, which is not just this sort of neoliberal tendency to discount the value of relationships, but it's the fact that when we think about policies directed towards kids, they're highly siloed as our funding streams. And what I worry that's going to create is very well-intentioned people inside of healthcare, social services, education, starting to unleash the power of AI, but that will add up to every kid growing up with an AI coach, an AI mentor, an AI tutor, an AI friend, and an AI lover. Because we are dealing in these point solutions, we are then creating this sort of digital network around kids, and no one is the keeper of the whole. No one is attending to the fact that we would slowly be eroding social connection in all these small ways that may be showing gains on whatever metrics you care about, but not attending to the social health of kids. So what does policy look like that attends to the whole, right? And that would be really novel. We've never really had whole child policy in our country, but I think that's what I hope this sort of new threat could unleash. I know that's really abstract. I'm like a think tank asshole, but that's the thing that I want to see happen.
I promise you're not a think tank asshole. Not even close. How about you?
I think there's a lot of things we could do and a lot of things we don't know what the effect they'll have. But I think, for one, I think there are a few things. For example, I think policy could be very helpful in clarifying, like duty of care for these companies. For example, there's a thing called Section 230, which gives social media companies immunity to anything on their platform. And the idea is we should probably clarify that this might not apply to AI companies or have, just basically making definitions clear so that the courts can kind of hold companies accountable for making safe products. And I think part of that is AI is evolving so quickly that I think policy is bound to fall behind, right? So I think a lot of this will end up happening in the court system, which is very unfortunate because it's retrospective, right? The harm happens and then something is done, which is tragic. I do think that will end up probably being what will happen because it's more effective with things like AI.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an unfortunate reality we live in, thinking about national policy and how things are actually not working very well, including the government shutdown, which I'm sure is affecting many here. On that point related to policy, I want to hear just a little bit, and I'm going slightly off track here, but I want to do that because the policy aspect I think is really important. And maybe Julia, I'll start with you. What are some things that you've observed about how policymakers are responding to the use of AI or chatbots in an educational context? Like, I know that you do some work in this area, but I'm really interested, and I'm sure this group is as well, in just hearing a little bit more about that domain, that sector sort of specifically when we're thinking about AI in schools for kids. There's obviously been a big push by the current presidential administration to really get AI into schools, but I don't think a lot of us really know what exactly that means. And so I would love to just hear you talk about what that looks like for you, if you've observed anything at all.
Yeah, it's not getting AI, it's getting A1 into schools, if anyone saw that was what Linda McMahon called it at an education conference, which just boggles the mind on every single front. I work for a nonpartisan think tank. That was just a human error. So I think there's a couple layers here. I mean, one is like, what was the educational policy that passed most quickly in the past year and a half? Any thoughts? Other than trying to shut down the Department of Ed, but at the state and local level? Cell phone bans, right? So the education system is, like, a lot of this conversation is drafting off of Jonathan Haidt's Anxious Generation work and his remarkable ability to really ignite sort of backlash against technology in an incredibly broad sense, right? And whatever you think about cell phone bans, I think it's fairly draconian, but it's also effective in some cases. I think that is complicating how people are thinking about AI right now, because there's this very real fear and anxiety and frustration with consumer tech. And there's this understanding for education systems focused on workforce outcomes that kids are going to have to understand this technology to be competitive. And so there's a little bit of waffling, to be honest. There's also still a dearth of evidence on ed tech apps that are using generative AI and how useful they are. So I've actually seen a lot of school districts sort of moving first in the productivity direction of how do we get this into the back office to make our operations more efficient, and being a little more conservative on the student-facing app front. Now, what we have at the policy level, right, if you look at legislation that California just passed, sort of to try and regulate algorithms, is again a little bit of a draconian move where we're bunching a whole bunch of AI together that could actually slow progress in implementing highly effective tools inside of schools. And so, like everything in education, it's a little bit of a hot mess. There's not great evidence yet, and I think there's ambivalence about what is our relationship to tech at this moment, if we've declared that, like, cell phones are a distraction, that there's risks to this new technology, that we have responsible use policies that consider most of AI cheating, but that students need this to be competitive. So it's an open question. But I know a lot of folks in the audience, like, work in education and might have a tidier answer than my read.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure we'll all love to discuss that on some of the breaks. Atiksh, I don't know where you are in your educational career.
High school.
Wow, I thought so, but I also assumed that you were in college, which is amazing. Okay, being the youngest person, ostensibly, I'm sure, here speaking on a panel. What has your experience with this been like? Are there policies inside of your school to sort of think about this? And of course, we sort of started this talking about policymakers, but I'm interested to sort of hear what that experience has been for you and what you think policymakers should be doing differently as it relates to AI in education.
Yeah, this is just like my opinion from my experiences. It's not like all encompassing.
It's valuable.
I think that the current education system is not meant to have AI involved. Right? The assignments, the whole structure, the curriculum is not designed around AI. So I think just throwing in AI and allowing kids to use like Copilot is not going to help anything. It's only going to make things worse, right? As people are going to cheat, and it's hard to say like, oh, use AI for good ways, but don't use it to write your whole essay, and then expect someone to follow that. Is really doesn't seem to be working. So I think either the whole curriculum needs to shift to be aligned. I think should happen, right? To shift to be aligned to have like an AI-focused curriculum, like learn how to write prompts, prompt engineering, agentic AI. There are things you can learn and teach, and that's how I see AI being used effectively, not just letting kids use, AI.
Just one quick concrete example of what you're sharing, a survey of college students asking about sort of using AI to quote unquote cheat. The rationale for that was pressure to perform and lack of time. So we've designed a system where the pressures on kids, and I'm not saying we have to sort of treat all young people with kid gloves, but the pressures are so great that it's almost inevitable that they're going to turn to these tools. And until we revisit some of those structures and dynamics, this is going to your point, plug into a somewhat toxic pressure cooker environment.
Right, and to your point, that's not a technology problem. It's sort of a societal problem that we need to be thinking about. Yeah. Okay, for the last couple sections, we're going to pivot to thinking about what don't we know, and then maybe try to end on a slightly positive note. Which is funny in this environment sometimes. Yeah, what don't we know? What are some of the things that you genuinely don't know? Open questions about how AI is affecting social connection in the world today. I'll ask both of you. One of you can start. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, this is also a great question. I think there's a lot of things we don't know,
Yeah.
and it's so emerging, it's so rapidly changing that we'll find out. I think for now we take for granted that human connection is more fulfilling than AI relationships, and I think that's true for now. But as AI becomes more realistic and more engaging, will that always be true? And if it ceases to be true, then what does that mean for humanity in general? I think we also, like we said, human relationships are messy, right? They're hard. So how do you convince people to choose that harder, more difficult option of talking to other people when AI is always there, easy, perfect, accessible? How do you get people to choose the harder option? I don't know.
I don't either. And I think hearing that from a young person like you, who's so smart and so embedded in this, is really powerful. It really made me sit here and think yeah.
Yeah,
Julia?
it basically makes me unable to breathe, so I just need to re-oxygenate. We don't know a lot. One is we don't really understand the business model behind some of these hyperscaler companies, and that makes it tricky because we sort of know the social media playbook was engagement at all costs. That doesn't quite add up with AI, where engagement actually costs companies money. And so it's a little harder to predict sort of what's going to scale and what companies are incentivized to scale. They're certainly incentivized to scale sticky user experiences, but that might flatten out at some point. The second thing we don't know is, I've come out pretty strong, and my greatest fear is that Gen AI disrupts human connection as we know it, because I think the market conditions are so primed in that direction. But there's research from folks like Rose Gungrich at Princeton showing that people using AI companions, their social health is not always deteriorating. There's research showing that AI can alleviate loneliness on par with a human. And what we don't know is, when that happens, does that mean you are therefore in a better place psychologically to go out and connect with people, or does it mean we're just going to scale isolation? And so we have to pay really close attention to the empirical research that is still candidly unfolding in real time to diagnose when this is risky and for whom, because likely similar to social media, this is going to be riskier for some subgroups or some people in some circumstances than others. So I think it's a little alarming how little we know, given how quickly the technology is scaling. And we just need an R&D function that can keep up with it.
Yeah, and I think one more thing with that is this is more of a hopeful action item, because this is something we can easily find out. But we don't have a lot of good tests to measure these AI models. It's called benchmarking. We don't have really good benchmarks for child safety, for emotional intelligence, for these things. And the ones that we do have are kind of out of touch with how young people actually act. So they're really not that useful in that sense. So how are we supposed to build safe designs if our measure of safety isn't accurate, right?
Totally.
And that's something we can do. That's something people in this room can make and can build. And I think that's really important to focus on as well.
I think that's a really good point. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the term benchmarks, I know we talked about it, or I mentioned it earlier in the context of Googling Intima and making that query a little bit more specific. A benchmark is just a measurement technique or a tool used by a lot of these AI companies to compare how their models perform against different models or different tests. And so some of the main benchmarks are focused on, how well a model does on something like an SAT score, or, responding to answers as if it were a PhD student in X domain. But really, these benchmarks are really highly contained to specific topics and domains, and so comparing how models perform on these benchmarks or what they're doing doesn't really apply very well in the real world. And a lot of these tech companies are working to develop benchmarks that are more focused on things like emotional intelligence, how a model might perform in relation to sort of connecting with somebody, but they're really underdeveloped. And to your point, in a lot of cases, they don't exist. And so, one of the things that I think would be really helpful is for more of these companies to be working with people like yourselves in the room who are actually using and applying these technologies in the real world to understand how they perform outside of a context like logic, which isn't actually all that helpful when you're using these things for something real. Just to provide some background there. Okay. We're going to pivot now to sort of empowering young people. Like I said, we're going to try to end on a positive note here. We talked about regulation, tech design, but what are some of the other things that we can be doing to empower young people? We've talked about, like I said, regulation, design, some education, like how do we kind of think about governing and policymaking for AI in educational context, but what else do we need to be sort of providing to young people? And I think we can't forget parents too, because they play a huge role in this discussion, and educators. What are some of the things that we can be doing to help people feel more confident about the way that they use technology?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is probably, I'd argue, bigger than policy, bigger than design, is facilitating real connection in the real world. I think is the biggest thing you can do to prevent, reliance on AI companions.
Yes, let's all clap for that, for sure.
So whether that be third spaces, community building, events, things like Lookupp, the idea is that if we can rebuild the culture of face-to-face interaction, if we can make communities strong, if we can build lives that are so engaging that the thought of sitting down and scrolling for hours or the thought of talking to an AI friend doesn't seem that appealing, I think that's the biggest cultural shift we need for human connection to survive AI. And I think we all need to work to make that a reality.
Agree. And I can't wait to hear more about all of the work that you all are doing on this today, because it's so important, and getting these discussions into the tech sphere and how these companies are thinking about this stuff is so important. So I'm so happy to be here. Julia, what about you?
Yeah, I just want to underscore, I study disruptive innovation, and as I'm looking at how this technology is scaling, this face-to-face piece is critical. It is the thing that will move the way we think about quality human interaction up market away from getting disrupted. And I know that's a very technical explanation, but if we sort of stay in the digital realm, we are much more vulnerable to these AI companions sort of working their way into our digital social circles. Two more things. I think allowing and supporting and giving capital to young people to build solutions is a really exciting development at this moment, because the cost, and we have one right here, right?
Yes, please.
Young Futures is a great nonprofit doing work like that. There's other incubators cropping up that I think are Youth Voice had a moment starting about 5 years ago in education, and there was a lot of tokenism in it. But seeing actual capital go to young people, I think, is like the differentiator that I think is going to make a difference and allow for actual tools that attend to the things that young people care about. So that's number one. Number two, Foundation for Social Connection put out this intergenerational dialogue guide. Rhythm Project, who I mentioned before, has been talking a lot about how young people can feel judged talking about the fact that they're using AI. For a whole variety of reasons, that adults think it's weird, that we think you're cheating, that there's a penalty on your credibility. I struggle with this one. Like, I'm a parent, and being a non-judgmental parent is definitionally impossible. Like, I don't know how to curb the fact that I am judging my kids, because when I look at my kids, I see myself.
That's really powerful.
I'll stop there because it makes me emotional. But so how do we become less judgmental and more curious?
Thank you, Julia. That's really powerful. Thank you for sharing that. I'm just going to take a breath for a moment, because what you said right there is, I think it's just really, really prescient, and something all of us need to sort of think about and remind ourselves when we are thinking about young people and the way that they relate to technology, and especially what you said, Atiksh, about how young people specifically are relating to technology, and to sort of approach that relationship, approach that dynamic from a place of non-judgment. So thank you both for creating the space for that feeling. Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. What about, we already talked about empowering young people from your perspective. We did this. I'm sorry, got caught up in the moment.
We empowered him.
We empowered. We all empowered all of us. You empowered me for sure. So in the last 5 minutes here or so, I think, that certainly was one thing that I have taken away from this conversation that I've learned. Approaching technology use from a non-judgmental place, particularly when we're talking about relating to our children, relating to our students, even relating to elders and other people in our lives, maybe using technology. Heck, even like friends partners, colleagues who may be using it for relationship advice, for mental health advice, as afraid or as scared we might be about those sorts of use cases. To your point, I think it just speaks about the lack of connection so many of us are feeling, and how these technologies are really sort of stepping in and playing a role. So just having the space for that recognition, the acknowledgement that it's happening, I think is really, really powerful, and something I certainly have learned and taken away from this conversation, or just really, really sort of appreciated on a different level. But I'd love to hear from both of you, what's another thing that you've learned in this conversation that sort of changed how you're thinking about this? Or in addition to that, or instead, something that you really want to keep exploring throughout the conference today with this group? Anyone can start.
Yeah, so I think I learned a lot of like the technical insights I always saw, increasing face-to-face interaction as like a preventative factor for going to AI companions, but the idea is that if you value face-to-face connection more as a society, it'll become profitable to promote that, is like a new way of looking at that I hadn't seen before. Another thing I want to add, it's kind of slightly less related, but something I think could be practical for the people here, is that I think it's really important to include youth in solutions that you're building for youth, right? That's just good design. And also...
Yes, yeah.
Sorry. And also, I think that's important because I think peer-to-peer programs resonate more, right? Young people just don't like being told what to do by adults, right? And that's just the truth, I guess. So when they see a solution is coming from their peers, when it's co-created by their peers, it increases receptiveness a lot more. And I think that will help those solutions be a little bit more effective, right? With guidance and support from adults. And when you're talking about funding to young people, I want to shout out Young Futures, who really values that. They give us funding, and they very much value including youth and having the youth perspective when designing these solutions.
Yeah, I love the reminder that you gave about peer-to-peer education. I myself, just as a funny anecdote to bring it up here again, used to teach sex ed at my high school through a program created by Planned Parenthood on the Teen Council, was what they called it. But it was much more effective, I realized, to learn about sex ed, whether it was an absence-based program or not, from your peers instead of your gym teacher who couldn't pronounce certain words. So I appreciate you bringing that back to us here. Julia, how about you?
Again, can't breathe. That's for different reasons. I mean, I think I knew this, but I just love how concrete the example of what you're building is, which is you can be pro-innovation and pro-social. And those feel like oxymorons right now in the current climate, but look up, because the model is so innovative in terms of both how you're bringing businesses to the table and you're enlisting youth ambassadors and you're using technology because it's so embedded in kids' lives, but you're using it to flip the script. So I think like continuing to look for really concrete examples of new business models and new structures that that again are innovative, but that actually promote social connection. I know so many of you here at this conference are that, but innovation has sort of gotten a bad name because it's been all about efficiency for decades, and that is contrary to connection so often. So,
thank you so much. In closing, I think I'll just say that I've taken so much from this discussion. It feels really powerful to get to start my day with the two of you and all of you here, and to sort of witness and experience the emotions of this discussion as we're talking about kids and technology and policy, like big structural things, and how they affect each of our lives on a personal, individual level and as societies and communities. And I guess I'll just end by saying, you know, I think that's a really powerful point that you made, Julia, about how innovation and social connection need not be in conflict, and I hope that it's something that we can keep exploring here today. I want to thank the Foundation for Social Connection for bringing us all together, and really just take a moment to thank these fantastic panelists for sharing their vulnerability, sharing their insight with us. Thank you.